This leadership mini-series is kindly sponsored by Minerva. Minerva is an executive search firm that works primarily with higher education clients to develop outstanding teams, cultures and structures. Minerva supports universities in making senior executive appointments across academic and professional services roles and in recruiting to non-executive and interim positions. Minerva's consultants also help individuals in the sector and outside find their best path through a career in the sector. Since 2020, 5 cohorts have passed through Minerva's Emerging Leaders programme that works with people in a critical development stage of their leadership and management careers, including heads, deans, deputies and directors. Minerva also runs Aspire, a pro bono leadership development programme to help maximise opportunities for talented minority ethnic professionals to enrich their careers, and Board Prospects, an initiative to provide people from underrepresented backgrounds with experience of governance. I'm Susanna Marsden, a higher education consultant who helps to develop and support HE institutions in the UK and beyond. This podcast takes a deep dive into the roles of people who work in this hugely varied higher education sector. Each episode reveals what's involved in a specific role, the career path that led to it, and tips on how to get in and get on in these jobs. My guest in this episode of the Leadership Reflections mini-series is Professor Shân Wareing, Vice-Chancellor of Middlesex University. In this episode, Shân shares more about her professional background and progressing her career through an educational development route and into senior leadership. With a prime motivation to want to see students flourish and for institutions to work effectively, Shân reflects upon her pathway to becoming a Vice-Chancellor, including what she's learnt along the way, her approach to team leadership and managing resilience. She also considers why it's important to be supporting emerging leaders of the future and how she still sees leadership as a learning process. Shân, welcome to Job Shadowing HE and thanks for being my guest in this Leadership Reflections mini-series. You're Vice-Chancellor of Middlesex University, a post you took up in the spring of 2024. When did you start your career in higher education? And can you talk us through the career steps that led up to your current post?
Lovely to be with you today, Susanna. I had a straight run through being an undergraduate, postgraduate taught, PhD. Very fortunate at the time to be fully funded for most of that, which I know is a huge privilege. I started part-time teaching as a PhD student, primarily driven because of needing a part-time job. Absolutely loved teaching, and then got a full-time job as an academic. And very, very quickly, I realised that I didn't want to build a career based on research that a very small number of people might read and find interesting. And I did feel I had much more influence through teaching, and I became very aware that I could teach better. So I began to try and plot a path of work through teaching and learning. So I moved into becoming an education developer, and then led an education development unit, and then sort of moved into management and leadership through a dean's role, and then executive roles, PVC, pro vice chancellor, deputy vice chancellor, a chief operating officer for a little bit, and deputy vice chancellor, then a vice chancellor.
And reflecting on the career steps you've just outlined there, I mean, you took on your first leadership role in 1997 as head of the Educational Development Centre at the University of Roehampton. How did you find your first experience of leadership, and how did it compare to how you thought it would be?
Well, I don't think I had any expectations to compare it to. I can remember finding it being a big surprise, actually, how hard line management is. And it was definitely something I had to learn quite quickly. I made a lot of mistakes. There was a huge amount to learn about line management, I think, and I would say I probably spent about a decade before I felt anywhere near competent at it. I think it's extraordinarily difficult, actually, line management. Other people and all the things that you have to do to be in an organisation and to be legally compliant and to be reasonable with people and get things done. It's very complicated. I think we underestimate very much how much preparation people need for it. Leadership itself, I don't think I found particularly difficult. I think one of the things I found was I had quite a flair for strategic thinking. I was very lucky to get involved in a development session on strategy in my first line management job. I really enjoyed it. It came very easily to me. I understood all the concepts. I could work with them, manipulate them quite easily. So that always made everything easier, because the moment you've got a strategy and a plan, you've got something to explain to people and share with people, and a shape. You've got a shape that you're moving towards. So I think finding that came easily to me made everything a lot easier.
At what point did you decide that you wanted to progress your leadership career to becoming a Vice-Chancellor? And what was it that you wanted to bring to that role?
There's actually two completely different answers to this. One is, when I was 30, I was sitting in an assertiveness training class, and we all had to name an ambition. And I was like, I haven't got an ambition. I can't think of an ambition. And I was sort of panicking as they were going around the room. And it came to me, and I said, I want to be a Vice-Chancellor. And I was like, I have no idea where that came from. So there was clearly something in me that thought, I want to make things better. And if I was in a more senior position, I would have more influence to do that. And it was clearly there, because I wouldn't have said that otherwise. But I think, on the other hand, I never had a career path in mind. All I ever wanted to do was the next thing in front of me. So if I couldn't do it, I would think, well, how would I be able to do that? Well, I would need more influence. I would need more resource. And then I would look at how I would get that. That was always a cumulative process. It wasn't a long-term plan. I couldn't actually see my way forward through all those career steps. It was completely opaque to me how somebody would get from where I was to be a Vice-Chancellor. But every day I'd come in and think, I wish that was better. I wish I could do that better. I wish I could have more influence over that. And that drove me to move quite quickly through jobs. I think I'd probably changed jobs more than a lot of people. And it was because I'd just get to the point, I'd think, well, I've done everything I can do here, but there's all that other stuff to do. So how do I get to do all that other stuff? And I'm really interested in efficiency. It sounds really boring. It really upsets me when I see resources used badly. And I think from quite early in my career, I'd look at things that I thought were inefficient, and I'd think, well, why don't we do it this way? Why don't we do it that way? Why, if we lined things up or did it in that sequence, it would all work so much better, and we'd have so much resource over to do other things. And I think that was a huge driver. All I ever wanted to do was see students flourish. And it was very frustrating to me when the system chewed people up and spat them out, and I couldn't align the resource to help somebody. So I would start to look at how I could channel resource to help people, and what it would take. And so for a long time, when I was being interviewed about vision, I really struggled with the answer, because all I ever wanted was the system as I could see it to work better. I felt I'd benefited hugely from my education, and it upset me when people couldn't, when students failed, or they wanted to stay and they hadn't met the credit requirements, or when things happened out of their control. I found it very upsetting, and I wanted to change it. But I was also aware I wasn't taught very well. I was at a Russell Group university, and I was kind of left to sink or swim quite a lot. And when I did my master's degree, I was taught in a much more structured way, and I could really feel the benefit, and I felt I learned much more quickly and in a much more secure way. And that was something I wanted to translate for other people. Really, that was my ambition. I didn't have an ambition to be a vice chancellor or a leader. I had an ambition to make what we had work better for more people.
As we talked about a few minutes ago, your route to becoming a Vice-Chancellor, the post that you hold now, started out as an educational development career path. And that's a path that contrasts quite starkly with what some may see as more traditional academic disciplinary routes. And alongside that, you're a female VC in what's been an historically male-dominated role. How did you find navigating that context, and what were the ups and downs along the way?
Oh, there's so many parts to that question. Just to take one small bit of it, I was in a Pro-Vice Chancellor role, sitting at a table with other executives, and I thought, this is lovely. We've got the same number of women and men at this table. And then I looked at what we were doing, and I was the Pro-Vice Chancellor for learning and teaching, student experience. There was the head of library, who was a woman, and the head of HR. And then the men were leading research, estates, IT, and finance. And I thought, first of all, I thought actually, if you're leading finance, estates, IT, you've got a lot more clout than if you're leading HR and learning and teaching, just because of the capital expenditure and the amount of money you control. And the other thing I thought was how early in our careers we'd taken decisions that had taken us up those pathways. I'm not ascribing value to the different pathways, but actually, if you're sitting at a table, why was it that there was a gender imbalance in how much money people controlled? And when had the decisions been made? And I thought that was partly our own decisions and also partly pathways that opened up in front of us, probably. So I think the question of gender is really complex, even when you've got what looked like equal numbers around the table. I said already, I didn't really see a way forward. I couldn't understand the steps I would have to take to get into senior leadership. And I could see that it was going to be difficult for me. You do sometimes see people be promoted because research carries more status in universities than education development, and that's still the case. Less the case than it was, but still the case. So I think I had a job to do to convince people that what I'd done had academic credibility. It depends how much resource you've controlled as well. It really helps if you can show that you've managed a large budget and capital expenditure. So I think there's things to be aware of that are used as signals for ability and leadership, proxies sometimes. Sometimes it's genuine experience, and sometimes I think it's used as a proxy. And there was a point at which I began to try and acquire the things that would allow me to be promoted, because I realised that the path I was on, although I felt I was developing a lot of leadership skills, it didn't necessarily demonstrate to the outside world what I could do as a leader. So there was an active act on my part of starting to collate experiences which people would understand as being leaderly, as well as the things that I was innately doing, if you like, because I felt it was things I wanted to change or make happen.
And to what extent was it possible to learn from other people?
I've never had one single role model, but I saw lots of people do things well that I learnt from. So in every stage of my career, I was looking around me and seeing people who were managing situations that I found challenging. And I was watching how they did it and trying to learn from them. And I think even sometimes when people, on balance, were people I might not choose to work with, they were always doing something well that I could learn from. So at every step I was doing that. And once I chose to have a male coach because I felt I had networked very effectively, particularly with women at the same level as me. So it was more of a support network than a power network. And I thought maybe for the next stage, I actually need to learn from people not like me. So I found somebody who was running a project at university, and I really admired the way he was running it. And I asked him if he'd coach me, because I thought if I could do more of what he's doing, that would help me with the thing that I need to do next.
And while there were previously very few female vice-chancellors and even fewer VCs from an educational development route, is it right that within the last few months the sector's been fortunate to gain 3 female VCs with that educational development background?
That's right. Myself, Julie Hall, and Claire Taylor. Yes. So we were the same generation, and we joined Staff and Education Development Association together. Absolute revelation. There were people really working on education development, learning and teaching. I found it really inspiring, and it was a fantastic supportive network in which I took on roles at executive level. There was, organising national conferences, got a massive network across the UK and internationally from it, and experience of being co-chair. So got committee experience from it as well.
Taking on successive leadership roles are significant steps within a career pathway, both in relation to having the responsibilities that go with those positions, as well as how you discharge them and how you bring people with you. Have there been any particular learning moments for you?
There's a couple, actually. One was a big assessment and feedback project at University of the Arts London, and another one was a digital transformation project at London South Bank University. So they were They were very complex. I worked with a lot of different people, and I had to unite people to a common purpose where they couldn't necessarily see that it was in their interest from the outset. And we had to approach it from a lot of different angles. So I was, sorry, I've forgotten the word. It's really stupid. It's a simple word. I had to bring a level of consensus in a core leadership team to an activity, and we had to develop the skills to run the project as we were running the project. And we also had to deal with a lot of challenge of people we never won over, but we just had to get a critical mass to get the change through. So it was a mixture of sort of building consensus, but also being able to deal with opposition and not necessarily give in to it while learning new skills at the same time. And because they were both big projects, it was a massive job of communication. And my background's English literature and linguistics. I'm fascinated by communication and how you share messages and how people respond to them and how people build narratives about what's happening. And if you can start to shape people's narratives, you can shape people's reactions to things in the future. And that sounds really devious, but I wouldn't use it in a bad way. You know, what I'm trying to do is help people see a positive outcome could come out of a difficult situation by getting the narrative to stretch from where we are to where we want to be and help them have a mindset that's going to navigate a challenging change.
And experiences like those presumably feed into how you approach your leadership now.
Yes. So one of the things I think has made it a lot easier for me being in a senior position is I never used positional power to get things done. So as an education developer, you are, we talk about third space professionals now, but if I was going to use a more negative word, I would say marginalized. You are on the edge and you don't have direct levers of power. And I found that out. If you're going to ask me, you've asked me about what I learned from, I can remember standing in front of a group of academics once with something that I thought had to happen. I was very wedded to it, and I realised I had no traction over them at all. I had absolutely no way of getting this done, and they'd chew me up and spit me out. And gradually, that was a very unpleasant experience. But from it, I learned that there were ways to get things done with people that you had no positional power over. I had no levers to make this happen except my own ability to convince them it was a good thing and it was possible and it was desirable, and that they wanted to do it. So I think by developing those skills over the early stages of my career as an education developer, they always came in useful later. And most stuff happens much better if you don't use positional power. You use other ways to get things done. So I felt I developed quite a wide repertoire of how to achieve that without having to fall back on I'm the Vice-Chancellor and I said it, so do it.
And would you say leadership is all about the people?
It's all about the people. It's only about the people. Yeah.
Some decisions a Vice-Chancellor has to take are tough, whether those are decisions arising from an agreed strategy or decisions that come about more unexpectedly. And sometimes those decisions will not always be personally easy for a VC, but they follow through because of the longer term benefits for the institution. What's your approach to managing your own resilience?
I think I've always had quite a strong sense of purpose. I've always felt that if you've got power, your job is to protect people with less power. So from the time I started educating students, I felt I had an obligation to them. And I had advantages they didn't have by that time. You know, I had a degree and I had a graduate career and I had a salary and they didn't. And so my job was to help them move there. And I think when I'm in any position in the institution, I always felt our job was to support the people who had least voice and least power. And that was so clear to me that most other stuff didn't really affect me. I had no doubt that if at the end of the day I'd done something that helped somebody where it was my job to help them, then any other flack or any other discomfort was background noise. So I think that's always helped. I feel very upset when people use their privilege to benefit themselves and not benefit other people. So I've got a very clear, I suppose, moral and emotional commitment to delivering the mission of the university. Sometimes people say, how do you keep going on projects which are difficult and don't look likely to succeed? And I think, well, I go to bed feeling depressed about them and I get up and the problem's still there and it hasn't been solved. So what am I going to do with my day except continue to try and resolve that issue or that problem? So for myself, I don't find that resilience very difficult at all. It's there. I mean, I probably do work on it I do quite a lot of competitive sport, and I enjoy that. So I think that probably builds a physical resilience, which is important. But I don't find the mental resilience very challenging, actually.
And for those colleagues that do, I mean, for example, emerging leaders who may find resilience difficult, is there advice or have you given advice to other colleagues about how to manage that more challenging side of leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think people are generally driven by purpose, and you just need to connect to it. So I think once you've got that clarity, it gives you a very strong core. So I think reminding yourself what your own purpose is really important. I think support networks are hugely important. People you can turn to. I also think reminding yourself things won't last forever. It'll probably all be the same in 100 years. So I was doing something the other day and I thought, I'm not sure this is going to go that well. And then I thought, you know what? Nobody cares but me. And next week, everybody will have forgotten it. So I think trying to keep things in proportion in that way is really important. Um, and when I'm going through quite challenging times, I try and make sure I do something I enjoy every day. So there's just a bit of lightness in the day, and I feel a bit more in control. I think agency is hugely important. So if you are out of control of something, I find it very upsetting. I think a lot of people do. So I try to have things where I do have a sense of I've got some control over the outcome, even if it's going for a run or something.
I want to talk a bit about teams. In a wonky article you wrote in 2023 on 5 traits of HE leadership, you talked about the importance of team and that leaders can only be as effective as the teams they create and maintain. Across your career so far, what's been your approach to team leadership?
So I absolutely 100% believe that leaders are only as effective as their teams. And when I was pregnant with my second child, I was worried about not working hard enough. I was knackered and I had a child at home and I was looking at another maternity leave coming up. And I looked out and I realized I had a team of people outside. And if my work supported them all to be 10% more productive, that would be so much more beneficial to the university than me working another half hour. And I thought, all I have to do is help these 20 people be more productive, and I can go home early. And that was a real like mind shift moment. And I thought, oh, my job as a leader is to help them do their jobs well. And then that really changed the way I communicated with them and managed them and the amount of attention I put into building teams. Um, I think there are structural things you do as well as human things to build teams. So you make sure that when you're designing job descriptions, as far as possible, people aren't in competition for resource and time. So I think one of the dysfunctions of teams is that people feel that they can't work together because they'll lose something if they work with somebody else. And you don't want that. You want them to feel they gain something by working with other people. So you have to structure your job descriptions and your team functions so that people gain from collaboration. I think you have to make it safe to collaborate and not lift some members of your team up and scorn other people in meetings. You have to make team meetings an environment where people feel respected, so they're willing to step forward. And you have to really appreciate diversity. Teams really have to have different points of view, different ways of doing things, different voices. And so I think as a team leader, you have to really create a space that's safe for different voices. And I'll give a quick example of that. I was running the Race Equality Charter Mark submission at London South Bank, and we wanted people of colour in the room and we wanted white people in the room. And the white people didn't I'm sure people didn't realise this, it wasn't conscious, but they dominated the talking spaces. They talked more. And I was really shocked. And I thought, but my job as the chair is to make a structured environment where I'm not going to tell them off for talking more because they've come as allies. We need them to be positive about this. I don't want them to be humiliated. But equally, we can't have a situation where the white people are dominating a conversation about race equality. So I structured it so that there was very managed turn taking. I put exercises in place so people were timed. So without telling people that I was addressing an imbalance of power, I put in a structure that corrected the imbalance of power.
And as Vice-Chancellor at the moment, you have an executive team around you. What approach have you taken to working with that team?
Um, I put probably a lot more time into team conversations than sometimes some people are comfortable with. Initially, I think usually it pays off. So then when people see the reward of the time spent, they're usually fine about it. Try to spend some time one-to-one with everybody. I try to understand them, what they can bring, but also if they've got concerns or there's barriers to doing what they're trying to do, I try to understand the barriers. We have structured team meetings that are quite task focused, but also times where you're just getting to know people. And so that we have social times as well. Because I think teams are effective when they trust each other, and trust doesn't just appear, it has to be built.
And as a Vice-Chancellor, I mean, in any university at the moment, there's so much that you'll have on your plate. You could spend all day in a meeting, I guess, with your executive team. How do you work through what the priorities are and how best to spend the time of the executive team?
Yeah. So still work in progress. I've been in place 8 months, and I've got an executive team which I think is entirely different from the executive team when I arrived. Lots of different reasons for that. We had staff on interim contracts, and I brought different roles onto exec than were on exec previously. So it's lots of reasons for that change. So that is work in progress. I've got a staff development plan for the year, so we'll be working with a coach to help us to support our development as a team. I also I'm going to be changing between smaller, more intense team meetings and larger, broader leadership meetings, so that for succession planning, and so that the deputy deans and the directors of professional services are involved in some of the executive discussions. So once a month, we'll have the wider team. All the other weeks, we have the executive team. I've also been running a critical incident group based on the fact that we had to look at some of our financial and recruitment issues at pace and get them right in a very short academic cycle. So I only had 3 members of executive on that to make it much more nimble. So I was trying to use people's time well, make sure that they're involved in the decisions they need to be in, make sure that they know what's going on in a sort of Reiki way. Are you responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed? So not in a very rigid way, but trying to make sure that people know the conversations are going on and they know who's taking part, and they know they will take part if it matters that their voice is there. But if not, they just know it's going on in the background. So transparency is really important, and clarity. So people don't feel there might be some secret agenda going on over in some back room they're not involved in.
And thinking about that fast-paced environment, I mean, it's immersing many leaders, isn't it, at the moment, including those colleagues who are working in different positions in the university, heads of department or deans or professional service directors. As Vice-Chancellor of your institution, how do you aim to create the right conditions to help those colleagues progress their own leadership development in what are really busy times?
Yeah. It's a great question, because I think supporting emergent leaders is incredibly important, even in times when there's a lot of other things going on. It doesn't stop being important. And in fact, you need your next layer of leadership even more, because if you lose somebody at a critical time from your top leadership team, you're really going to need someone to step up fast. And so the preparation of leaders on the way up is really important. I also think people often have really strong leadership ability and traits, and they don't recognize themselves as leaders. So really valuing those traits and giving people who don't name themselves as leaders a chance to develop is important. We need diverse leaders, both demographically diverse and in approach. So I think encouraging that diversity, encouraging people to see themselves as leaders, and projects are often a really good way to give quite junior people a chance to lead something at institutional level and see if they like it, see if they want to step up, and give visibility to leadership practices, because I think it's often quite opaque what leaders do. You have to be able to see it, don't you? You have to be able to see it to know that you could do it. What else? Well, we need more diverse leaders. I think finding ways to build opportunities for people of demographic groups where they're underrepresented at your top table is really important. It takes a while to build that pipeline. So you always have to be starting, and you need talent management to keep your best people, and you need succession planning, as we've said, to help people step up.
And I mean, obviously, we've got some emerging leaders through the sector at the moment. You talked there about heads of department or deans or service directors. Should we also be seeking colleagues from outside the HE sector too?
Well, I certainly think, first of all, we need to learn from people outside the sector. I've really enjoyed working with consultants, lawyers, people who've had a different education from me, different professional practice, and working together to solve a problem together. Sometimes it is hard for people to step into the sector, I think. So if we're going to do that, we need support around them to help understand what might be difficult, and also where the challenge is useful and where actually it doesn't fit. The public sector is different, and leadership styles in public sector are different to get the best out of people. So you can't just bring it, even if you want us to be more commercial, you can't just bring in commercial practice, because it just doesn't land with people, and you won't get the best out of people. So really understanding how to bring in views from outside in a way that makes the sector better, rather than just maybe being more problematic than beneficial. So I think it's important to have that diversity of view that we get from working with other areas, but it's not simple always to step into the sector.
Do you think universities are difficult places to understand?
I think they're very organic, and I think they do amazing things. And I think the process of change has to recognise that you often need a coalition of the willing. So I don't think they're that difficult to understand. I mean, there's complex interrelations of regulatory bodies. We've got the OFS, we've got Ofsted, if we're doing apprenticeships as well, and we've got things like nursing and midwifery council. So there's things you have to know in order to operate in the environment, and the funding streams are various. I mean, it's not particularly complicated, but it is a body of knowledge you'd have to know to operate effectively.
Finishing up our conversation today, you've reached the position of being a Vice-Chancellor. Is that the pinnacle of your own leadership development, or is leadership still a learning process for you?
I feel like I'm learning all the time, and if I wasn't growing, it would probably be quite boring. So, and the other thing is, I think, I wake up and think, well, this was a challenging day, and then I look at something that Angela Merkel did, and I'm like, oh, I'm not even in the foothills. You can look outside and see people suffragettes or civil rights leaders. There are people who've done amazing things, and I think I wouldn't know where to start on the things that they've achieved. So there's always more to do.
Siân, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your reflections.
Thank you, Susanna.
Job Shadowing HE was written and presented by Susanna Marsden, and you can find out more information about her consultancy work at susannamarsden.co.uk. Audio production and music was by me, Rhodri Marsden. Find out more about this podcast and hear previous episodes at jobshadowinghe.com.